Today we're going to have a step-by-step instruction on building the sculptural human hand. So the first thing you want to do is build two oval pinch pots, and in order to do that we need two oval duck egg sized balls of clay exactly the same size. Once you have those exactly the same size, you're going to make an oval pinch pot by pushing your thumb in each end and then slowly pinching the forms open. So when you want an oval form, you start with an oval ball of clay. Just like when you want a spherical form, you start with a round ball of clay. So we just compress and overlapping pinches to begin opening the pinch pot like you would any other pinch pot, thinning the bottom first and then pinching up, round and round, overlapping pinches until you get all the way to the rim. So this first pinch pot is going to be about 1/4 of an inch thick, nicely compressed clay, and it's going to be half of this ovoid circular form that will eventually become the palm of the hand. Once you have one pinch pot finished, rest it on its rim and begin making the other. Once you have both pinch pots finished, they should kiss together rim to rim to create a large oval enclosed form. When you are making that second pinch pot, refer to the first one as you're making so that you can get those rims to line up perfectly. Once you are finished making both of those pinch pots that meet perfectly rim to rim, we're going to start making, put those aside on their rims, and I'm going to start making the part of the thumb that attaches to the palm of the hand, and that in itself is going to be another pinch pot. So we start with this little spherical ball of clay about the size of a large gumball, and then pinch that open to another small oval. Now you want it proportionate to the larger pinch pots, as if the larger pinch pots make up the diameter of the hand and the smaller one fits proportionately to the size of the base of the thumb. Now we're going to start making fingers. So grab a piece of solid clay and begin pulling the clay into those finger knuckles. So one side of the finger is somewhat flat and angular, and the other side of the finger is rounded and fleshy. We want to create that as we're pulling a finger from a solid wad of clay. First knuckle, second knuckle, and then of course the third part. So it's solid from the first and second knuckle, and then it's a little hollow pinch pot at the base. So you always want the fingers to be a little bit larger than life. In fact, everything's going to be larger than life here in order to account for the fact that clay shrinks, and then at the end we'll have a hand that's not really that much larger than life once we account for the shrinkage and the drying and firing. So we're making fingers and we're just kind of generalizing, right? We're not getting into too much specific detail at this point. Solid in the first and second knuckle and hollow at the bottom. Make them a little larger and longer than you need, and don't get into too fine detail. You're going to want 4 of those. I usually make a few extras, and then once you've got them all made, you can kind of decide which one is going to be in which place on the hand. And also at this point, you are going to want to decide on the gesture. So lastly, I'm pulling out a thumb here, and because we made the base of the thumb, the thenar eminence, we only need to make the first 2 knuckles of the thumb. And the thumb is always a little bit wider and flatter than the rest of the fingers. So we're looking at our own fingers at this point and making it proportion to the hand itself, and also, looking at our own hand and fingers as a model along the way. So here we are just making the solid first part of the thumb where the thumbnail is, and then it's hollow in the second knuckle, and then of course that little pinch pot we made is the base of the thumb. So it's solid, and then hollow on the inside. And this is the gesture we're going to do. So once we've made all the fingers, the palm, and the thumb and the base of the thumb, we're going to use a pinch pot method last time to make the wrist. Now, I always make a short span of wrist, and I always cap that wrist off at the bottom. So in order to make the wrist, we're going to start with a ball of clay about the same size, about an egg, duck egg size, and then maybe smaller, depending on how long you want that wrist to be, and then pinch pot all the way through. So we're not doing a floor here. We're just pinching it open to a 1/4 inch thick oval that's open on both sides. I suppose you could use a small slab and roll that up to make the wrist, but I feel like pinched forms are more like flesh than slab built forms. So it kind of has the same sort of surface quality, the fleshy quality of everything else we've made so far. So I'm going to set that aside, and then I always cap the bottom of the wrist off with a piece of clay. So here I'll make a small disc to cap that wrist off, and sometimes I'll do a little painting down there or something. So we're just going to make a little oval of clay, pat it out like a tortilla, pinch it till it's the right thickness. Now you want it the same thickness as the wrist, the same thickness as the palm of the hands, those 2 pinch pots, the same thickness as the Dinar Eminence pot. And then we have our hand components all created, and we're ready to assemble. You're going to need your scoring tool, or a needle tool. I have a 5-pronged scoring tool. You're also going to need a flexible rib. I like the pink rubber rib, or the blue is a little firmer, but you could also use your metal, sheet metal rib as well, not the serrated one. So first thing we're going to do is slip and score the palm together. It's a big volumetric form compared to the size of an actual palm. We're going to use slip that was created by drying this clay body and slitting it slake in water to create a thick slip. I'm going to score up the edge and dab that slip on. I'm going to dab that slip on nicely all the way around onto that scored edge, trying hard not to mat down the scoring that we did. If you ever inadvertently mat down your scoring, you can always rescore through the slip and add more slip if you need to. So now I'm scoring the other side, and I'm sort of holding it gingerly, right? We just made these pinch pots, so they're actually really soft. We just made them. I mean, they're nicely compressed, so they do have some strength, but we just made them, so they haven't dried yet. And then we're going to get those edges to kiss together perfectly. So you're holding this very gingerly so you're not collapsing either form, and while you're getting those edges to go together perfectly, and then turning it just to make sure we've completely trapped air in there. And then you'll have a seam. Once you have that air trapped in there, you can gently compress that seam together, and it will ooze out a little bit of slip, and a little scored edge will be showing. We're going to cover that with a fresh clay coil. Right out of the bag, soft fresh clay, and I like to roll it on my wrist so that I don't have to put the form down, but also because it's fresh soft clay and we want it to stay wet. So you can roll it on the tabletop or on a board, but we want the wettest possible clay here because we want it to adhere to that seam that's oozing slip and has a little bit of scoring there. If you roll it on the tabletop, it's possible that just the act of rolling that coil will dry out the coil a little bit more than you want it, but I'm probably going to be okay to do it either way. I just got in the habit of rolling it on my wrist, probably just so I didn't have to, put the form down. So we're going to have this fresh rolled coil of clay, flatten it out, and then cover the entire seam with a super flat, very tiny, very wet coil of clay, almost like a Band-Aid over the whole thing. Once you've got the whole thing covered, then you're going to use your flexible rib to smooth over that entire seam. So the seam should be somewhat invisible. So this is giving a lot of strength to that seam, which, you know, it's fresh clay, it's very soft, and then we've added moisture with the slip, so we need to strengthen that up. All the way around, just gingerly smoothing. We don't want to collapse the form. We want to keep that trapped air in there. That air, for now, is going to give us the structure and the support we need to continue building this form. So smooth, smooth, smooth. All the way around. And you know, it goes pretty fast, but you really want to be pretty meticulous about this because we're going to ask a lot of this thin, wet clay form. We're going to ask it to hold all the weight of all of the other forms that we made. So we're really going to smooth it really well. Then you can put it down. This is going to become the palm of the hand. Now you can tell it's way more volumetric than a palm of the hand actually is. So don't worry about the fact that it's not looking realistic just yet. In fact, the form looks increasingly more ridiculous until very close to the end of building when you finally start to see the realism come out. So be patient with the process at this point, and now you need to decide what gesture you want your hand to make. Hopefully you've already decided this, but it depends. When you attach the base of the thumb, it's going to be in the front of the palm if you're making a closed thumb gesture, and it's going to be on the side of the palm if you're making an open hand. I'm making an open hand here, but the example hand behind me is closed. That thumb is in a closed area, so it's more on the front of the palm instead of the side. But here I'm going to put it on the side because I'm going to make a nice open hand. Slipping and scoring where it's going to be attached. And then placing that where it belongs. And then again, we're trapping a little volume of air in there. This is a very thin, very small pinch pot, less than 1/4 of an inch thick, probably more like 1/8 really. Yeah, maybe 1/4. Attach it all the way with the rib, and you can reinforce that with a little coil band-aid as well. I find that you can, on these wet clay forms, you can attach a small amount of clay as long as you compress it really, really well. If you're attaching big globs of clay, you need to either make them hollow, ideally, or slip and score, make them separately and slip and score them together later. But a small amount of clay to just fill in a seam or add a little volume here and there is usually okay. Nice if you when in doubt, score it up. But here, open thumb, and now we need to attach the thumb. So I'm looking at my hand again, and I'm going to put the second 2 knuckles of the thumb right where they belong on the base of the thumb. Position that well, and then slip and score that area as well. So we have this enclosed form of the palm. We have the enclosed form of the base of the thumb, and we also have a little pinch pot in the second knuckle of the thumb. So we are attaching yet another enclosed form here. And all of these enclosed forms trap air that give the piece structure. And at the base of each finger and thumb, there's a little pinch pot, and that tubular form adds a lot of structure and strength to the object. Of course, before we leave this to dry, there's a lot of steps to go before we're thinking about drying, but before we leave this to dry, we have to remember every single place where there's an open pocket of air and release that air with a needle tool. We'll go over that part in the second video. Now, it does look silly, right? But you're starting to kind of see it. Still a little bit too chubby and volumetric, but we're going to fix that. Next, we're going to attach the fingers. So you'll decide which finger goes where. One will naturally be larger, that's going to be the middle finger. One will naturally be smaller, that's going to be the pinky. And the other 2 are about the same size. Depending on the gesture you're making, that's when you'll decide which one goes where. Score up the entire top of the form, just like that. And then a little bit down the side too. Then we're going to score every single finger and slip and score, attach them all in sequence. At this point, you can lie hand down on the back of the palm, what's going to become the back of the palm, because when you look at your hand, you'll see that the back of your hand is somewhat flat. And so the plane of the table will not take away from the realism of the back of the hand, because the back of the hand is somewhat plainer. So we scored all the fingers, and now we're adding slip on the whole thing. So we're adding quite a bit of moisture here. So we need to be real careful. These are all scored up really well. Now I'm making an open hand, so there's not much gesture really at this point. Attach each finger, and I just grab my towel, because you get a slippery mess on your hands when you're working with a lot of slipping and scoring. Attach the middle finger, just gently push it into the scored form, fumble. So, that's one of the reasons why we don't add a lot of fine detail as we're building. We're working from general to specific, very general. That way, if you fumble something, you're not going to undo a lot of hard work. Plus, you never know with figurative forms. You need to measure for anatomy all the time. And oftentimes, our first impulse isn't correct, and we need to go back and correct things. We're going to attach the pinky now. But first, I'm going to reinforce the backs of these first 3 fingers with a little bit of clay. So we can add a little bit of clay to that scored up oozy area where they're attached, and we're adding a little bit of clay in the center of what's going to become the back knuckles. And if you look at the back of your hand, you'll see there are knuckles, and then there are tendons back there. So that clay is going to be smoothed in to become the knuckles and tendons eventually. But right now, that clay is just there to anchor these fingers in place. There's a lot of weight we're hanging off this form right now. Those fingers are solid from the first and second knuckle, and then hollow little pinch pots at the base. We're going to do the pinky next, and the pinky actually goes a little bit into the side of the palm. So what we do is we carve off a little edge of it, score up that edge, add a little slip, and nestle that right into the side of the palm. So if you look at your hand, you see your pinky's a little lower than the rest of the fingers. So we want that to be accurate. And then we're almost finished here. Now we can spend some time really attaching those fingers well, ribbing that extra clay that we created those knuckles with, and making sure everything is nicely attached. And then you see how no matter what I'm doing, I'm supporting the hand with my other hand. So I'm making sure those fingers are not flopping around by giving them support with my other hand while I'm working one side. And with clay, we're always supporting one side. If you're not supporting one side, you're not compressing. And compression is the most important method of forming. So now we have those all really well attached, but it still looks like super bloated and fat, right? Not correct. So here's where the magic happens. We are going to take our needle tool, and we're going to poke a hole in the palm. Now, it is possible that somewhere along the way, this will bust open a seam or something, but right now it's completely enclosed. So we need to release some of that air and start to compress in the gesture and the thinness. So if you look at your hand, you'll see it's actually sort of thinned out. It thins out at the pinky area. It's a little bit chubbier where the thumb attaches, but we're pushing air out through that hole we just made to establish the size, scale, and gesture of the hand. So that's when we start to get some realism. As soon as you've pushed out the right amount of air, you want to cover that little hole. And if you've busted a seam, now's the time to fix those seams. Slip and score and attach some clay there. Rib it over really well. We still need some air in there. We don't want to collapse the palm completely. If you push too much air out and collapse the palm, it's pretty difficult to get it back opened up again. So push out just enough air to establish the sort of cavity in the center of the palm. And then we are going to work on the wrist. We're going to set that hand down on the back, right? So the plane of the table can establish the back of the hand. And then we're going to put together the wrist. Put together the wrist by slipping and scoring both sides. That's the base of the wrist. And then slipping and scoring the volume of the wrist. I'm just going to cap that off. I don't know why. I feel it's cleaner when you cap it off. And we need that hand form that we just created. We need that to firm up a little bit. So we're not going to attach the wrist right away, actually. We're just going to create the wrist and let that sit on the side until everything's firmed up a little bit. I'm just tapping and letting gravity help me out a little bit with compressing that seam closed and then smoothing it over. So we're still handling very, very wet clay. We just made this. I didn't pause and let things firm up at all. It's just the amount of evaporation that took place in the creating of each component. So we have to be kind of careful with these forms. And we added a lot of moisture to the hand too, so we're really careful with this. Now you want to keep in mind that eventually we'll attach that wrist, but where you attach the wrist informs the gesture. If you put it behind, it's almost like a stop hand. If you put it in front, it's almost like curling back or holding something. If you put it straight up and down, it's like a raised hand kind of. So you want to decide, but then set everything aside. I'm going to set everything aside, cover it lightly, and let it dry a tiny bit, just so it all equalizes with regard to moisture level. Part 2, next video.